Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Open Sketchbook Podcast, Episode 3. This is a host-led bonus episode, and I wanted to piggyback off of the two previous episode conversations that I had. Episode 1 with Juliette Aristides and Episode 2 with Nicholas Uribe. We talked in both episodes about Juliette's incredible first book, Classical Drawing Atelier. This book is what put me on my path. I found it, I think, late 2006, maybe early 2007 in Barnes & Noble. I was an undergraduate student at the time at the Pennsylvania College of Art and Design, and I don't remember if I had made the switch into illustration yet from graphic design, but I was majoring in graphic design first. And I remember being in the life drawing classroom and seeing all the illustration students that had studied anatomy and how well they were doing and how hard it was for me to get anything in proportion. Proportion was one of the most difficult components of representational art to capture for me, and it's taken me years. It wasn't really until I found myself in grad school that I think I gained the skills necessary to really understand the scope of what proportion could be in art and all the different comparison and measurement tactics that are available to us. But I will say that in 2006, Juliette's book hit the shelf and I saw it. I did not read any article about it. I didn't see any forum posts. At the time, I was on Massive Black's conceptart.org forums, which were a godsend. It was the first online community that I stumbled on that had a large user base of very dedicated students. People would have virtual sketchbooks, and I'm sure you can kind of see where I got the inspiration for a lot of what I'm doing. And I hadn't seen anything about her book there yet. A lot of it did show up where people were working through it, talking about her different lessons. But on the front end, I found myself in Barnes & Noble, and I was looking for art books because my friend at the time had started to collect a lot of books, and I really wasn't a book collector. My mother was an avid reader, but she was sort of it for the family, and so this idea of collecting art books was new to me. Maybe it was graphic novels that got me into that at first. The first graphic novel, I think, that really captivated me was Dave McKean's and Grant Morrison's Arkham Asylum. It's amazing. The art is incredible. And it's one of Dave McKean's early painted graphic novels. And his style has definitely shifted since then. But that book, for me, just showed me what was out there. And it got me excited to make art and tell stories and study the figure and atmosphere and texture, and I just loved how dark and gritty that was. So that book, Arkham Asylum, is what made me rush to my sketchbook and get out the acrylic paints and pastels and, try to play with effects. He really captivated me with the effects he was able to achieve. Watching Dave paint one of the comic panels with some white acrylic paint and it looked like smoke. That kind of blew my mind. And, he was photoshopping things and fooling with all of that. But when I found the original pages online, I saw that they had been edited, but not as much as I had thought. And it was a real testament to just his level of raw artistry and how excited and engaged he must have been with the project. I later found out that Grant Morrison, who is such an interesting character of a human being, but he had storyboarded the graphic novel as well. And I learned that Grant Morrison's an artist and he thinks through things by drawing. And so here's this incredible graphic novel where it's made by two artists, one using language and loose storyboarding sketches that are actually really beautiful on their own terms. And then, of course, one of the greatest illustrators of our time, Dave McKean, coming in and just elevating that book to the level of the really weird narrative that's just so fitting. That book, and this is a big tangent from where I thought I was headed, but that's why we're here, right? That graphic novel, Arkham Asylum, that is the book that made me sprint to my sketchbook, that made me go to the art store, that got me excited about the potential for illustration and showed me that illustration wasn't just following a branded style. And I think I needed that for my soul, and those lessons are still with me. I put them into my teaching. So I had that, and I think that's what got me going to Barnes and Noble often. I was a little intimidated by going to the comic store. We have an amazing comic store here in Lancaster. Every inch of that place is steeped in comic history, and you can find any book that you're after, new, old, random things that are self-published, find their way there. It's an incredible store, and it scared the hell out of me when I was a kid because I thought, I don't know enough to approach this. There's too many things here. How do I know what's good? And then, of course, there's the problem of the book cover. I have a love-hate relationship with book covers. And when you're looking at a packed shelf, you're looking at the cover and you're looking at the title. And if you recognize one of the artists and they have enough cred, you'll take the book out and flip through it. I just kind of realized that that's what YouTube is now. So that's gross, but I guess that's the game I'm signing up to play too a little bit. Anyway, so I was a little intimidated by the comic store, and Barnes & Noble felt more accessible to a newbie like me. So I would go there probably 2-3 times a week. I picked up a couple of books that I was really excited about, and I remember walking through from the graphic novel section over to the art section. And when I was there was a book that caught my eye about halfway down the aisle. I saw it on the shelf. It was front facing, not side facing, and it was Juliette Aristides' Classical Drawing Atelier. And the cover is what got me. The incredible Pierre-Paul Proudhon chalk drawing of a female nude figure, and no one draws like him. No one uses chalk like him. People try, but no one can do it. I've seen a lot of people that work in that method, or what they think is his method. There was a really great blog post I found at some point in undergrad where someone was trying to uncover his method by using different alternating form following strokes and then stumping them in different layers and building up hatch passes and stump passes. And all of that's so admirable. I don't think that person was correct in their analysis, but I love that they were as captivated as I was by his incredible work, that they wanted to chase it in that way and then share it with all of us, which I thought was really cool. So I could not afford the Pierre-Paul Proudhon drawing book, which, if I remember correctly, that's called The Language of the Body. It's an incredible publication of his figure drawings. And his figure drawings are so much better than his paintings. His paintings are a little weird. They're definitely not my favorite, but I couldn't afford the $300 to $500 Pierre-Paul Proudhon drawing book yet. But I had this. I had the Juliette Aristides Classical Drawing Atelier book, and yeah, it was like a magnet. I just walked over, I grabbed it, I was flipping through it, and I remember thinking to myself that I'm looking at a community of artists that I didn't know existed before, and there's a ton of them. There were people in that book that I was seeing for the first time through the very carefully curated imagery that Juliet went through, and artists that I would later go on to study with. I would assist, I would be their TA, and I would carry their lessons forward into my own teaching. Artists like Stephen Assail, Michael Grimaldi, Dan Thompson. Although I'm not sure if Dan is in the first book, but he's absolutely a part of that circle. And I was so captivated by all of the imagery in there that I actually put the graphic novels back because I didn't have enough money to buy all of the things in my arms, which is still a common experience that I have in Barnes & Noble and the comic store. It doesn't help now that when I make my book trip, I actually go to the comic store and Barnes & Noble in the same trip. Part of being an adult and having a little bit more money is, you get yourself into trouble, right? However, what sold me on that book was not only the curated selections, but it was actually a drawing on the inside cover. I can't remember if it's the inside cover or the inside page, but it was a green color pencil drawing of a figure by Randy Melick. And to this day, I still think it's one of the greatest drawings I've ever seen. It started to reveal to me the things that I love about drawing, which are a graceful line, a descriptive line, an anatomically informed graphic statement, profound perspective and gesture, the experience of looking at something that is familiar to you, but you haven't seen it before. That's an experience that is hard to find as you get older, especially with the internet. We are so inundated with images. It's really nonstop. I mean, it really is nonstop. And so that experience of being a very excitable art student and opening that book and seeing that drawing. So first I had the cover that just like melted my brain, and like a Disney character riding the pie scent to the windowsill, right? I picked this book up, and then the Randy Melick drawing on the inside cover. So immediately before I even got to the book credits, I was sold. So I picked that up. I vividly remember seeing how the book was laid out, and it felt accessible. It felt helpful, and it felt like it had reverence for its own material. I can't explain why that mattered to me so much. In episode 1 of the podcast, Juliet brings up the art magazines at the time that were pretty popular and how wanting they were for maybe more studious endeavors or better curation. And I'm not saying that, you should ever edit out art from the canon or from what's being made. And, I want everyone's work to be seen, but I kind of wanted more. It felt like there was no overarching curation of those magazines. And so I never really bothered with them. Every once in a while, you'd get a good tip like how to stretch watercolor paper, or, it was always with watercolor, actually. It's a lot of stuff had to do with watercolor landscapes and flowers. And maybe, as someone that wanted to paint the Joker in some weird, crazy, dark style, maybe I wasn't the best, target audience. But when I was looking through this book, there were images by artists I recognized from my art history classes like Degas, but drawings that I had never seen, such as the drapery study, which I think is, again, only a couple pages in. So I feel like Juliet really understands portfolios, because the way that she packed the front of that book with just bangers, I mean, great image after great image, it completely sold me on it. And I ended up picking up that book, and I don't think I let it out of my sight for about a year. I practiced all the lessons. It was the first time that I had ever heard of something called a block-in, which is a starting notion of being able to analyze your subject matter and to begin to construct the design of your image. And yeah, this idea of like just how to start that isn't a finish tactic. It sounds so silly, but when you're a student, you don't, you have this impulse to draw, but you don't really have someone saying, hey, you don't have to finish as you go. You don't have to get every mark or every moment correct. You can be more strategic, right? Let the pressure go a little bit, leave more room for questions. And I think that that's what I appreciated about her books so much, is for the first time, I felt like there was a drawing idea, a drawing concept that left room for me to continue to ask questions. And I no longer felt like I was staring at my subject who was just expecting me to answer everything perfectly. And that stress, that pressure of perfect mark making, we all have it. Drawing it's a visual language, but it's tied to your haptic sensibility. When you look at something and you try to draw it very seriously for the first time, if, I imagine if you're listening to this, you've been drawing forever, but if you can try to remember the first time you actually tried to draw something, quote unquote, correctly, you were on that line like a hawk, right? You were looking at those contours. You were so dialed in. It was the most intense study of a contour that you've probably ever done in your life. And you didn't even know that you were doing it, because you're tracing that haptic response with your eyes. I always tell my art students, we see in shape, but we think in line. The more that you educate yourself the more that you'll start to develop parallel strategies, right? Things like structural thinking, compositional design tactics. There's so many to list. I'm not going to make that a whole thing here, but what Juliet was offering me as a young art student who was coming from a place of education where outside those doors, in the fine art world, a lot of people were saying that painting is dead, that the figure is dead. Why would you want to be a fine artist and still do that old stuff, And I think that's what drew me to illustration, because illustration never stopped showing the figure or narratives or stories or paintings. Illustration doesn't discern between high and low styles or high and low materials. And so in my illustration classes, I was being shown Norman Rockwell, who studied at the Art Students League, who studied with a lot of the people that this book champions. And so I was sort of being let in on a group of artists that existed both in the past and in the present. There were a lot of contemporary artists in this book that I just didn't really know was a thing. And it felt like finding a clubhouse. And then I had that feeling like I've been missing out my whole life. And also, where can I sign up? How do I get my membership card? And what Juliet's book offered was your membership card is, can you do a good block in? Can you slow down your vision and appreciate what's in front of you in a profound manner? Do you want to tackle the problem of form and graphic representation? Is portraiture of interest? Are grand, timeless narrative compositions of interest? All of that is in this book. And that was really exciting. She goes into materials, which I'll be honest, I think I looked at, but those are the pages that are the most untouched for me, because I was already obsessed with art materials and techniques from the graphic novel explorations that I had been doing. I was really keen on the examples in the book that she was showing. She would have an Ingres drawing. I usually say Ang, but I want to, attempt the French pronunciation. That sketch by him in the heading for the line chapter, right, is incredible. Like I said, the Degas drawings are just beautiful. The Michael Grimaldi drawings were astounding. I remember meeting Michael Grimaldi when I went to grad school. He actually taught the first class that I ever attended at the New York Academy of Art. He was teaching at the time as a favor to Ted Schmidt, who was on sabbatical. I remember when he walked in the room and he looked towards his easel in profile, I was like, that's the guy from the drawing. Because he has a really amazing profile drawing in this book. And it just was shocking to see that. It was a fun experience getting to meet someone where I had pored over their images in this book for years. I mean, years before I met him. And so that was kind of fun. It's a unique way to meet someone. It's a unique way to have an experience. I think it helped me take a lot of notes. I don't know if I was able to really listen as well as I later on was able to in his class, because I was just so jazzed to be at the academy and to be learning these things at that level. Felt really rich and really exciting. But yeah, this book is what got me on that path. And it's all thanks to Juliet's pursuit of getting the word out, doing the labor of curation, writing everything down, and just really working out that material in a way that a complete beginner to all of this could appreciate. Now, that's not to say that it's a book for beginners. I don't think it is, actually. I think it's a book for intermediate students, and it's accessible to beginners, but it does a really good job of showing you through sublime examples of art and drawing. Also, this is a tangent, but how amazing is it to have a really great drawing book out there filled with examples of great drawing? I am constantly disappointed at the lack of drawing exhibitions available to us. That's why anytime that I get to curate a show, I always curate a drawing show, of which I have one coming up actually in April. So more on that soon. But anyway, so yeah, I think it's a book for intermediate level students that the beginner can really appreciate and can find their way to the intermediate level through this book. So if you're looking for something to sort of spark some more insight into your creative practice and you want to revisit drawing as a concept and get to know a little bit about, I guess, where I come from as far as my pedagogy, but also to see where Juliette Aristides started her author journey, you really should check out Classical Drawing Atelier. There will be a link in the description or a link in the show notes. Um, I think you really can't go wrong with this text. Now, she has done a couple more rounds of authorship where she has another drawing book, and that one's fantastic too. I just have a soft spot for the first book. Her second painting book is on my syllabus every semester, and I'm very excited for her book that's coming out in April, which is The Inner Life of the Artist, Conversations from the Atelier. That comes out April 9th. I've already pre-ordered my copy, and if you want to hear a little bit more about that, episode 1, we get into it a little bit, so it's definitely worth checking that out. What do I want to say to follow up with all of this? I will offer one word of caution, and I'll tie it to the question I always ask everybody. What was the hardest thing for you to unlearn, right? So what was the hardest thing for me to unlearn when it came to this book? The most amazing quality of this book for me is the curation, but the step-by-step procedural aspect of it felt accessible, it felt clear, and it allowed me to really focus in on these profound lessons and give them the time of day that they deserve. However, my recommendation for someone working through any how to draw book or any artistic program is not to allow your own personal studio work to suffer through the idea of steps. The hardest thing for me to unlearn when I was making the transition from eager, bright-eyed student into, still eager, but maybe a little bit more tired, more experienced professional, is that step 1 and step 2 and step 3, all of that's negotiable. The step system exists to provide space for you to continue to reframe your perception, to continue to ask questions, to continue to build a scaffolding for your work instead of constantly finishing it as you go. That's the only job of a stepped system in art. You are not beholden to someone else's idea of a procedure. It's so easy to be offered a prescriptive manner to make art. And when you're learning, that's not a bad thing, but you need to know when to let it go. And one of the things that I remember asking my mentor, Jeff Geib, was, what's the difference between a still life that you set up in the classroom and a still life you set up in the studio? And he said, well, the still life in the classroom, you have to be able to draw it. And I love that answer because it's a little snarky, which is perfect, Jeff. But I think it's really true that what he's really saying is the still life in the studio, your own personal still life, that exists to challenge your idea of your pursuit. It shouldn't just be the same old thing you would set up for anybody. And engaging in the technical narrative, engaging in your procedure, engaging in, challenging those habits that you've earned through thousands of hours of drawing and observation, but they deserve to be challenged. That's how we grow. That's how we get stronger. And so I would encourage you to challenge your procedure. Challenge the script that you have for yourself. Do you go back to step 2 after step 5? Do not ever think that you have to have something perfect and complete before you can move forward. If something is available to you and it's exciting to you in the drawing, move forward. Go for it. But just know that you're sacrificing something by doing that, but you're also gaining something else, right? So, as Juliet said in episode 1, drawing is a chess game, and the moves are yours to make. There is no set prescription for chess. Okay? I think I also should highlight Nicholas from episode 2. He has an amazing Patreon page, OPL Together, and one of my favorite videos that's there. I mean, he's just putting out so many things, but one of the videos that he put out is about his concept of overdrawing. And I love that. To me, he is the perfect contemporary example of challenging your procedure and not being beholden to a step 1, step 2, step 3 mentality. So the idea that you're going to work on a painting and then it's not really working, you've lost the structure, or things are getting a little muddy or unclear, to be able to say, I'm going to just go in and do a linear mass in, or do a block in on top of it, or firm up the graphic structure or scaffolding of this image, just to get my head on straight, sharpen my eye, right? That's an amazing thing. It's such a good tactic, and the results speak for themselves. The video is definitely worth watching on this Patreon. So I set out to tell you about the one book that put me on the path to where I am now, sort of as a bonus episode to celebrate the podcast launch, and just to, I'm really feeling the excitement of being able to talk with Juliette Aristides. Once again, she was like a rock star to my artistic journey. And so this is sort of a celebration of that. But in true artist fashion, it turns out there's multiple books that got me where I am, and one of those is Arkham Asylum, a graphic novel. And I like that dichotomy. I find them both equally helpful. I don't know if I would recommend them both to a new student and say, these are what's going to get you in that sketchbook working hard, but it's what happened for me. I would love to hear what your books are. What got you excited to make art? If you're watching this on YouTube, put that into a comment. Tell me what art books got you really into art, made you really excited. If you're not on YouTube, if you're listening to the audio versions, I would encourage you to keep the conversation going, to reach out to us. I have a online community for artists called The Virtual Studio. And in The Virtual Studio, we have a whole podcast space where you can respond to the podcasts, ask questions. I'll tell you which guests are coming up next in the interview process, and you can give me questions to ask them, or even, put me onto someone cool. Tell me who you want to hear from. Please join our community, The Virtual Studio. That link will be in the description. Thank you for listening to the third episode of the Open Sketchbook podcast. I'm excited to be able to put episodes out every week. I'm looking for Thursday releases, but we'll see. It might end up being Friday sometimes. If you are watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you like it, please like the video. It really does help me out. If you're listening to the audio version and you'd like to give a review, please do. I would really love that. It would really help us out. Keep the conversation going on the Virtual Studio, and check the show notes for a bunch of links. Hope that you're well. Look forward to talking next week. Take care.